Welcome to the World Builders Anvil, episode 181. Today's topic, the 7 rules of fantasy magic systems. Don't know where to start building your fantasy world? Do you need more? Does it make sense? Forget any worries and become a crafter of imagination. This is the place that will help prime your mind. Now, it's time to heat up the forge, break out the mithril ingots and hammer. Welcome to the World Builders Anvil. I'm your host, Jeffrey W. Ingram. Let's sup from the mug of Java and build. Welcome back. As always, my name is Jeffrey W. Ingram.
And I am Michael Miller.
And this is the show where we just basically make shit up.
Here in the Fuzzy Butt Studios.
The Fuzzy Butt Studios. The MC Hammer Pants Studios of the world. And, we'd like to thank everyone for joining us.
Just talking about the cats keep coming into frame on that side.
Well, besides calling Ball Fuzzy Butt, we call him MC Hammer Pants.
I was wondering where the Hammer Pants reference was coming from. You call the cat that?
Yeah, it's because of the way his hair looks at the back when he's walking away from you. It looks kind of like MC Hammer Pants. So, and for those of you who aren't familiar, like Michael and I are, they're really big pants.
Yeah, big baggy pants. And for those of you that don't know MC Hammer, go to YouTube. And we'll just feel old. Don't tell us about that.
All we could say is, uh-oh. I'm sorry.
Oh my gosh, don't even. So, this one's a good one. I'm really excited about this episode because if you're creating a fantasy world, I mean, really one of the most defining characteristics that it's fantasy is that it includes magic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I know it's like I've talked a few times about magic. I've talked about a couple of versions of magic for my world. We've talked about Smoochie. No, get that. Okay.
See, the funny part for me is that every now and then your cat's tail flings into the camera frame, and I can see like a fuzzy tail just flashing through the frame, which cracks me.
Yeah. So historically, I have talked about magic a few times. And actually, you and I think in episode 89, which will be linked in the show notes for this episode, kind of went over a very generic idea of what magic systems are, but I've never really defined them. So I thought, hey, why don't we actually sit down and say, what do you need for a magic system? Not just kind of what works and what doesn't work, but literally there are 7 things that I think a magic system need. And a system isn't all of the details. It's not all of the world building. It's just essentially the rules for what you need in your world to be able to define your magic system.
Yeah, basically, if you take all this, you write this stuff down, or just take a look at the show notes, because I'm sure this will be listed in the show notes.
Yes.
It will ask you all the appropriate questions and tell you what you need to create to have a magic system in your world.
And essentially, the 7 rules of magic are 7 questions you need to answer for your world. And that will give you the framework for your magic system. And then as you're storytelling, as you're moving along, you can add details into it, fleshing it out. But the important thing is that you have sort of the idea of what the system is. And the big reason why it's important is for consistency purposes, right? It's very easy to be inconsistent with magic. You know, a lot of times we've seen magic through many different sources as fantasy lovers as well too, and it kind of helps prevent other systems that you've encountered with leaking into what you want for your storytelling. Now,
when you say consistency, because and I'm trying to think of a way to phrase this question because I don't want to jump into some of the later rules. But the idea of consistency makes me think of the different ways that magic occurs in a world. So
no.
Okay.
When I say consistency here, it's whenever you present magic happening in your world, it is from the same position. It's from the rules of the system, not how it occurs, what happens in it, none of that.
Fair enough.
And now another thing I think too is when you do this, it sort of saves you time and lets you get to the storytelling faster. Because one of the problems, especially when you're writing and you're not like role-playing games are easy because you take a system associated with the game and then you use it. But when you're writing, you can waste a lot of time trying to recreate a system, i.e. create a Dungeons and Dragons version of Magic or a Mage version of Magic or a GURPS version of Magic to use for your novel. That's not what we're talking about. It's not going to cover all of the spells, everything that can happen. That's really, ironically, not the important part of Magic. And you'll understand more when we go through the rules, but it allows you to get to the storytelling part faster.
This is this is something that lends into one of the tenets that this show throws out there a lot of times. I mean, it's called the World Builder's Anvil, so obviously world building is really important to us. And I would think that if you're listening to the show, it's important to you too. But we also see world building as a thing that services storytelling. So if you're just world building, great. World build to your heart's content. But most of the people that are world building towards story. So we always, I mean, I think definitely me and I think Jeff too, for us, story is more important. World building is imperative, but story is more important. So we want to make sure, just like with anything else that we do with Magic, that the system and that the creation of the world building aspect of Magic serves the story. So this is, a way to organize it so that you can get to the story. If you just want to, spend tons of time building a Magic system, absolutely, to your heart's content, whatever's fun for you.
Yes. And that becomes the hobby side, but it reminds me of an old phrase in the service, which was mission first, but safety always. And that was the idea that, the mission's always the number one responsibility of a soldier, but we always have to consider safety. Now, assuming that's true, if we pull it back out and think about, world building, it's storytelling world building first, but storytelling always. You're always telling stories within it. Even if you're doing it as a hobby, you're seeing pictures and things happening in your head. You don't need a consistent, well drawn out story, but storytelling's always going to be involved in it. Now, another important thing with doing this is when you're storytelling, you avoid Deus Ex Machina or the god from the machine, which besides being the crane that would hang over a Roman or Greek theater that would do the god stuff on stage, it's sort of become this term for contrived fixes to plots, where it's like you build a plot so impossible that the only way it can be solved is through magic that was not explained at all until you get to the climax. That way it seems really impossible. Then all of a sudden you have a miraculous finishing. I also like to call it the hand of God, where it just kind of comes in and it right at the very end, it fixes the story.
I find it's not always at the end, but I mean, classically it was, but some people will do it partway through stories. Usually, like I said, classically it's at the end. So for anyone not familiar, the idea of God and the machine, just as Jeff is describing, is when you might have broken the story. You might have written yourself into a corner, and because you are the writer and you are God in the world, you can just do whatever you want, and you just go poof, and it works. Or you throw some kind of thing into the story that is ham-fisted, that puts everything back the way you need it to be to keep everything on the rails, and that's just sloppy. And I mean, don't get me wrong, you'll see it. I still see it in movies today, but it's just frowned upon, and neither one of us are fans of it, because you can absolutely write a fantastic story without doing that. So,
and this is separate from the idea of magic might be part of the resolution. So maybe the protagonist has to come up with a new form of magic or rediscover an ancient form of magic, where that is an integral part of the plot that's weaved throughout the story. That's different when it's the god from a machine is literally, it just kind of poof out and at this moment where all of a sudden, the character can perform magic that was never even hinted upon, that doesn't make sense for what's happened in the story, just because you need to get past that big monster you just created.
Yeah, like don't get me wrong, like there's absolutely stories out there where the character works their way up to maybe actually make contact with a god to get help from a god. That's different. We're talking about when it just sloppily comes in ham-fisted out of nowhere. There's no good...
Contrived.
There's no reason for it to be occurring other than it's convenient to keep the plot moving or create resolution. And it's like, no. Like, you need to explain that. So.
And now the other great thing I think too is when you build a good magic system, when you follow these 7 rules, it'll help create character conflicts, either internal character conflicts or sometimes external character conflicts that exist in your world because of the system of magic. And as we go through the rules, hopefully those will become a bit more clear. If not, well, we're not here to answer your questions. We're here to just talk.
Well, the thing that I like about it is just the concept of the idea of a rule. A rule means, like, it. Just that word brings up a lot of things, like, rules are meant to be broken. So immediately there's conflict. And if there's a rule, that means there's something opposed to it. That means, like, I want to do a given thing, but there's a rule preventing it. So there's conflict in the word rule. Like, just applying that into a frame of how the world works and how magic works, you're gonna create character conflict. It's just so it's great. It's awesome. It's easy.
Yeah. And the last thing it does is it allows you to add detail later, but that consistently fits into the world and how you've developed magic. So it's like, think of something like a game, and games are trickier because you need all of the content in the game. But like if you're storytelling strictly in a non-interactive sense, if a fireball doesn't exist in your first 30 novels, you don't really need to know how a fireball works until you get there. Now, you probably have an idea from the system of magic that it could work, but you don't know all of the specifics, how much damage it does, because it's not relevant to what you're doing. You can fill in that detail later.
Okay, I see.
Now, next we're going to go over the 7 rules. And actually, we're going to go over the rules in a lot more context, and we'll give some examples and stuff in the next 2 episodes. So this is going to be a 3-part series, but I want to go over the rules quickly just to give you a basic idea of what we're talking about.
So how in depth do you want to get in this? I mean, are we just going to list them, or we got room for conversation on it? Because we're going to have 2 more. A bit. Because we're going to have 2 more full episodes.
We don't want to get into examples, but we do want to cover what we mean by it.
Okay.
So not in examples or trying to break it down in depth, just sort of what do we mean by this?
Yeah, so this is like an initial primer, and the next 2 episodes are going to be really in-depth follow-through on all 7 rules.
And I have to actually throw out some credit here, because this is actually inspired by a TV versus trope article called Write a Functional Magic System. So I do have to throw out, it was hugely influenced by that. And it's sort of taking my own ideas and working it in with some of the ideas from over there.
Before we get too far, I'm pulling it up on my phone. We have a lot of new community members, and I just wanted to shout them out before we get too deep into it. Now, some of these people may have actually gotten a shout out on one of our last couple episodes, but I'm not sure. So if I double shout people out, then that's all fine. But I wanted to say thanks for joining the community. Andrew, Axel, David, Diana, Eric, Jeff, Jesse, Bart, and Jason. So welcome to the Fantasy World Builders Undercroft Facebook closed group, and I hope to see more of you soon. But if you join the group, we're immediately going to attack you and barrage you and welcome you in a wonderful, huggy, lovey way on the Facebook page. But we're also going to shout you out on the show. So, but keep in mind that the shout out on the show will come weeks later because we record ahead of time. So, but welcome to the community, guys.
Yes, welcome to the community. And in the real world, as we're recording this, I've just gotten back from traveling a bunch. And so I'll be back home for a bit. And I was very excited. I think Michael listed them all off one day in the group itself because he has a tendency to do that when he has the opportunity to. And we really grew a lot since the last time that we ran this. So it's exciting to see the group growing. We love it. We love the creative minds, the people sharing their ideas, and some new active people as well, too.
Yeah, and actually, Jason, who just joined the community today, I was like, oh man, I can get him on the show, shout him out on the show today, was talking about some really in-depth and cool stuff like that. I hope you guys should just jump in there and hit up Jason. He's got some really cool projects going on, and actually a couple of the things that he posted about have got some show ideas. So like if we do a couple of shows based on what he's inspiring me to think about, I'm definitely going to shout him out again and give him props for the inspiration. So a lot of cool stuff in the group, guys. If you're not in there yet, you're missing out.
And once again, if you want to ever be interviewed in the show and you're wondering the best way to do it is probably to join the Undercroft and to actually get active and let us know that you're up to stuff and ask. That's the way most of the recent interviews have gone, have been people I know. So
actually, that is from the group. That is immediately what I thought when I read his stuff. He might be interview potential.
Oh yeah, and we'll always keep in mind. So now let's go to the rules. The first rule is what type of magic system, and I mean this from a broad stroke overview. If you think back to episode 89 where we talked about magic systems in a lot and not very much detail and very broad strokes, that's kind of what we're talking about. Is sort of in general, how does it work? Think of it as like your mission statement for your magic system, right? A brief description of how magic works in your world. You don't need to know all the rules to it. You're not trying to explain it, every detail of it, but in general, what's it feel like? You could take the movie producer approach, which is like, it's a little bit of a Die Hard plus Harry Potter. That could be what your magic system is.
I think like one of the things this makes me think of is mage, but the basic thought being like how it works in the system is basically how reality in your world allows magic to occur.
Exactly.
There's I'm not going to say what it isn't because that's going to lend to other areas, and we'll talk about that later. But
so we'll get more into that later.
How does reality accept the existence of magic in your world?
Yes. And now number 2, the second rule of magic is how is magic powered? How is it powered?
I love this question.
Where does the juice come from?
Yep.
Number 3, and the reason that all these rules are questions is because that's really the backbone of world building, right? So I frame them all as questions because when you're world building, you're answering questions. Rule 3 is how is magic used? And that's a little bit more of like, think of it as in casting, even though maybe it's not. So how does magic actually happen on your planet? And now rule 4 is rule 4 of magic is who can use magic? How do you know? How can you tell the people who are using magic in your world?
Rule 5 is what can magic not do? You're going to have limits. It's not like you can just, have magic do everything because that would solve all problems. So what can't magic do? The 6th rule is what is the price of magic? Now, you wrote this question. I want you to clarify that one a little because when I read that reminds me very much of how is magic powered, which is rule number 2. So what do you mean when you say what is the price of magic?
It's just sort of a personal belief that Jeff has about the world, the universe, is that everything has a cost. And so, deep down, not in limitation, not like, if you think of like games, not in how much mana you have or in those terms, but ultimately.
Like karmically,
what price do you pay for magic in your world?
Yeah, that's kind of what I thought you meant, but I definitely wanted you to clarify. And the final rule number 7 for magic is what happens when magic fails?
Yes, and then the rule 8 is there's no rule 8.
Magic failing, basically, I mean, I got a lot of things that come to mind for the failure of magic, like the expenditure of energy without the outcome, or maybe there is just as a powerful outcome as the input, but it's the wrong outcome, so that's the failure.
Yeah. Well, that leads into a lot of detail.
Well, that's why I wasn't going to get to.
Which this is not about. Really, the reason I added Rule 7, it was not originally part of it. It was the 6 rules. But the thing is, I think people are so apt to think about what magic is supposed to do when it works, they forget about the concept that it doesn't need to work all of the time.
I think that's an important rule.
There's potentially a consequence. So it's really more about making you remember that this is a thing. This could be, going back to those character conflicts, a failed spell, healing the king's firstborn son could cause a whole story. So
I tried to heal him. I poisoned him instead.
I will heal your son, and his head explodes. Yes, better start running.
Just stab me now. I don't feel like running for the rest of my life.
And if you have broad overview like costs, it might go in here as well. It might be very similar to the price. However, detail wise, it's really more there to keep that rule in your mind as you go along, that your mages don't need to successfully cast magic every time. And so just to think about, when you create a positive outcome, what would the negative outcome be on the detail end of things? And if there's a big system version of what happens when you fail, like maybe you lose a Lego, which would be horrible. I know.
Stepping on.
You thought I was going to go to death.
Finding it by stepping on it is the horrible part. The thing that I realize, this is almost a real sideways thought, but it really reminds me of something. The idea of having a positive and negative outcome for the input of a given magical task, that alone can give you such a tremendous story potential. I'm reminded of when Kevin Smith wrote Red State. What he was doing when he wrote that story, and then subsequently the movie, was that anytime he felt the movie was going in a way that he knew what was going to happen next, he knew where the story was going, he said, I'm going to zag. Like, I need to zag instead of zig here. I need to just purposefully choose something different. So you could have something in your story where the magic is about to do a given thing, and you intended it to do a given thing. Like, there's a small conflict, say a mini boss, and you have the characters have to kill this mini boss, and the death knell is going to be a shot with magic. But it, instead of closing him down and moving the story forward, fails dramatically. Well, now they still have to finish that guy, and maybe there's now an additional thing going on. You've just created a whole new piece of the story. I like the idea. I'm really glad that you decided to put magic failing there as a rule, because I think it's really important.
Yeah, because it was really going to go into either the framework or the story warnings, but I felt it was so important to think about that I made it a rule of its own. And once again, those 7 rules, the next 2 episodes we'll go into in more depth. We'll give some ideas. They're by no means meant to be comprehensive, but I think they're fairly comprehensive. So, because I like to keep things at an abstract level, so you can pull a lot of different techniques out of them. And we'll kind of go through that in more detail in the next 2 episodes. But now there are some story warnings, some things that you should keep in mind as you're developing a magic system, and really they don't hurt when you're world building in general. But the first one is, great magic systems don't make good stories.
Yeah, the system itself isn't the story. The application of the system also isn't the story, but as the application occurs within the context of the story, it's helpful.
And I kind of thought about this too, going back to when we tried the first time to outline your story for NaNoWriMo. And you had scenes, you had ideas, you had world building already. And much the same way someone could have a great magical system for their fantasy world, but not have an actual story plan.
That was,
even
we've referenced that episode a number of times, and I feel that it is a really, even though I felt like that episode was a failure on my part, I feel that it was.
It was a brilliant episode.
I felt that now looking back on it, I feel that it is a really great example of what we talk about a lot, where spending, like, your world building isn't your tale. And if you try to deliver it as your tale, it might be, boring or not very easy for someone to read or enjoy.
Yeah. And I'm just going to tell you this, Michael. I don't want the whole world to know. But No,
you are funny wife... now and then. I don't care what anyone says, Jeff. You are funny sometimes.
Rarely.
Yeah, sometimes.
No. Actually, Kristen had an idea for a story in my world years ago.
Yeah.
And she got the thing where she's kind of started the story. She is very similar to your idea, even though she's never heard the episode, where she can see scenes. She's really intimate with a lot of the characters, but she's never been successful getting it going. So we're going to actually do an episode at some point, helping her create the story. It's really about the overall way gods work in my world, which is how the story works, because it's about the cycle nature of Garthul. And so it's the end of a cycle and the birth of a cycle kind of story. But at some point, either as a bonus episode when you're not around and I need to record something, or if you want to do it, the three of us can work on together, it will be very similar to the second episode with you, where we're actually brainstorming out an actual story.
We should do that again. The other thing I want to do again is, we're coming back around to summertime, and I think that we should do another, session, like the Wine Steward. I think we should do another small, like, micro campaign.
So greedy.
Oh, definitely. There's definitely a self-serving part of that, of course, because I don't get to tabletop very often. But I think that in coming from the aspect of, we're hoping that your book is going to drop before fall. Is that what we're shooting for?
I'm hoping for late summer. I'm still waiting to hear back from my editing is not. I'm still waiting for my editor.
Drop the title. Drop the title again while we're talking about it.
It is The Steward's Son.
The Steward's Son. So I would love for the listeners to get a little more player-based exposure to the world, a little more exposure to the world. And I'm trying to think of what we can do. I mean, really, the first thing that comes to mind is some sort of traveling adventure, so they can actually see the countryside. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So, we'll strategize that out.
Cool. So getting back to magic systems do not make good stories.
No, they don't. And they can make a fantasy story better. But just because you have a good system, the consistency is really more important than how clever your system is. How unique your system is. You're probably not going to truly create a unique system. You might have not seen it before, or you might think the exact details are different than you've seen before. But if you've consumed a lot of different magic systems and different books or different games, or you're like me and you study, like ancient Egyptian magic and ancient Sumerian magic, really the idea is probably very, very similar to something that's happened already. So don't get consumed with that either. And that goes back to the how to create an original story episode. And now the next one is frame the system, track the details as you use it. So, fill in those 7 rules. And if there's some types of magic that are going to be common, figure them out just so you can get an idea of what it's going to look like descriptively. But you don't need to, let's say you have 15 different pieces of magic that happen throughout a story. You don't need them all to start writing the story. Until you get up to the scene that they're in, you don't really need to know the details of the magic. Now, once again, if you're creating a game, that's completely different, because by the time it releases, you have to have everything relevant in there.
And something important, taking a step back for a second about consistency, you want to be careful about breaking your own rules. I've seen in books where they kind of lay a given thing out and they say that, oh, well, this given thing can't happen. And then 300 pages later, that exact thing occurred. And it's like, well, no, in the beginning of the book, you were talking about magic, and you said that doesn't happen. So, and then they don't explain it. So,
and the struggling thing with that isn't you can do it, but it has to be important
or justified in some way. Like sometimes the reason a given thing appears to be breaking the rules is because there's a rule that they're not aware of. And that's
you have
fine
to deal with it.
But you need. I feel that you need to justify it to your reader, viewer, player.
And it doesn't necessarily have to be at the moment, because maybe there's a mystery.
Absolutely.
Or whatever. So you don't have to do it right away, but when you break your own rules, especially as they know it, but really if one of the points of creating a sequel sometimes is a good rule. A good idea for creating a sequel is to break something in your world. And it could be a rule of magic, but you have to deal with it in the story. And the bigger the rule break is, the more people notice it, the more it becomes an event. And keep that in mind. But in general, usually consistency failures are you just forgot the rule because you don't really have it written down. You don't have your little questions answered, so you just forget something, and it happens, and it doesn't get caught in editing, and you don't catch it writing out the scene.
Yeah, the bottom line is you want to follow your rules as you're moving forward through the story.
Mm-hmm. And I would also be careful, and this one I really stole from the website I put earlier, is be careful limiting your system, because I heard that it makes a lot of sense where we want to be clever.
You really sped through that. Say that again a little slower.
Be careful limiting your system.
Limiting your system, okay.
So when you throw in those things that Magic cannot do, be very careful adding stuff onto that list, and because realize you have to live by them. So if you get really clever and start making this really intricate system, you're going to make your life difficult as you move throughout the story. So I would just, I'm not saying there's a right or wrong amount. I'm just saying be careful doing it. Don't be too smart for your own good. like me.
And me.
I'm way too smart
me too.
For my own good.
Way too smart. I'm way too smart for Jeff's good.
Yes. Yes. Each of us are smarter than both of our goods put together.
I'd say I'm more smart than I am good.
All right.
So the world building task for today is to look at your magic system. And did you consider all of the rules? And if you didn't, obviously, you can take these 7 rules, go back through the system you already have in play, and answer all the questions, and maybe it'll fill out and complete what wasn't complete before. Or if you don't have a magic system yet and you want one, there's the 7 rules. And obviously, as we've already said 3 times, the next 2 episodes will give you a lot more detail.
Part 2 and Part 3.
What's the real world task for today?
The real world task for today is to go to facebook.com/groups/Undercroft and let us know the rules we missed, right?
Yeah.
I just gave very bold, very, bold to me. Like you might think that I missed what can magic do? Maybe you think that should be a rule. Go into the Undercroft group on Facebook and bring them up, and we could talk about it.
Yeah, I got to say, I have so much fun with everybody in the Undercroft group. Like, I love that, there's obviously a lot more people listening to this show. We're getting more and more downloads, which is awesome. Thank you guys so much. But I love our community. Like, I have so much fun getting on there and interacting with people. We do little writing things. We're due for a new writing project, so I'm drumming something up. But I love it. We got so many creative and super nice. Everyone's just really nice. So jump in there, guys. Like, come say hello. And as I've said before, like, you get direct access to Jeff and I. So if you want to just BS with us, and it's not just come to us and hang out with us, we're cool. The first thing we want to know is, what are you working on? Tell us about your stuff. Like, we want to know what's going on in your real world and your world you're creating. Like, what are you guys up to? So
because that's more cool to us than we are.
It really is.
That's saying a lot, because we are egotistical too.
I know. I know that your guys' stuff is way cooler than Jeff, so of course that I want to know. But Jeff can probably say the same thing about me.
Well, all I say is run a game with Michael and watch someone torture his own character. Dear. Okay. Now, we will see you all in the Undercroft, and we'll catch you next time.
Thank you so much for listening to the World Builders Anvil. We would love it if you would share the World Builders Anvil with 2 of your friends, and so would they. If they are unfamiliar with podcasts, then you get to introduce them to the wonderful world of podcasting by showing them Stitcher or iTunes, or, best of all, just send them to our website, www.garduel.com. That's GARDUL.com.
Now strike while the mithril's hot.